Fourth Amendment actually.
Strong police presence.
Just pull it.
Thank you for the conspiracy theory.
There you are.
We do have our guest on the line, David Blume. David, how are you tonight?
Hey, I'm doing great.
It's great to have you on the farm.
On the farm, well, all right.
Hello? You are on the farm, David. Thanks for joining us. You are an alternative fuels expert, if I can't say, particularly ethanol.
Yes, and in particular, I'm an expert on appropriate, technology scale ethanol instead of the giant alcohol plants that are being built in different countries. We're talking more about a people's level of alcohol production.
Okay, so
are you a doctor, aren't you?
If you could give us a basic rundown, what is ethanol in general? Just from an ethanol 101 standpoint, what is it?
Well, it's nothing more or less than moonshine, actually, and we're talking about rather pure moonshine, 192 proof up to 200 proof for pure alcohol. So. So basically, it's something we're all familiar with, but what most people don't realize is that alcohol was the first auto fuel long before gasoline was ever invented. It wasn't like there was all this gasoline lying around and someone said, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had an engine that ran on this stuff? It was the other way around. We had the engines, we were running them on alcohol, and gasoline was an afterthought.
Wow, interesting. So a lot of people out there are saying, okay, gas prices are through the roof, our economy's crumbling because all these people have to drive long distances and that they have to spend gas to do it, and that goes into the packaging and the oil prices. So they're now looking for these alternative fuels out there. Why is ethanol the good alternative fuel? Why not, hydrogen or solar panels or things of that nature?
Well, anything that's solar is going to be something that we're going to want because it solves the problem permanently. The problem with, things like oil or coal or some of the other alternatives they've got proposed for us, like oil shale to oil or tar sands to oil, which they're doing now, or coal to liquid fuel, all those things are still based on non-renewable, sources of energy, fossil fuels, and they eventually run out, and as they run out, they get more expensive. And that, without even getting into the environmental aspects, which burning those fuels is a disaster. So whatever we replace those with, and we have to replace them starting like yesterday, because oil is already running out, we ought to replace it with something that's based on the sun. And alcohol is liquid solar energy. Plants take carbon dioxide from the air, they mix it with water and sunlight, and make sugar. And that sugar we ferment with yeast to make alcohol, which we can then burn in the cars. So when we burn alcohol in a vehicle, we give back the carbon dioxide and water to the atmosphere so that we can go ahead and grow next year's energy crop. But the solar energy, which is released, is what drives our car down the road. So alcohol is a liquid solar energy that we can produce forever as long as we have, the sun. And if the sun ever burns out, we have other problems.
Yeah, we're really in big trouble.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, too, Lindsay, what about the big oil companies? They're not making their profits. So the big question that most people have is that, we have this, we know Brazil runs off of ethanol. A lot of people around the world have started adopting it. What about the big oil companies? How, where do they fit in? How come, there's two different things I have here. We know that there's oil in Anwar. We know there's oil in the Dakotas. We know there's all kinds of places in our own country that we can get oil from and therefore at least have the gasoline to lower the prices. But then there's also the idea that there's alternative fuels that we can use and not have to worry about this. So there's like two major problems. But what do you say to the person that says, why aren't we using it in this country? What do you think the reason is why America's not using ethanol permanently?
Well, you brought up Brazil. Brazil is the fifth largest country in the world. This is not some little pipsqueak nation. And yet they import, get this, not one drop of oil, not a single drop. They have some of their own oil, but 80% of their cars are now running on straight alcohol, and the rest of them run on 25% alcohol. So the need to run on gasoline is absolutely not there. I mean, Brazil has proven that as one of the largest countries on earth to convert. In Sweden, they expect by 2012...
Can I interrupt you for a second, David?
Well, go ahead.
How much are they spending per gallon over there?
They're spending about $2 a gallon on alcohol, and they're spending about $5 to $6 on gasoline.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So, it's not only is it a good idea, it's cheaper. Now, in the United States, we're using corn instead of sugarcane, so it's more expensive here, not because it should be, but because right now corn prices are being manipulated by the oil companies. So if you want to ask why we're not using alcohol in the United States, it's the same answer that we've had for 100 years, which is we have tremendous political resistance from really powerful oil companies, which, you asked what about the oil companies. If we went to alcohol, we wouldn't need oil companies. So basically, that's what it's all about. And if you take a look at who runs the country, well, we've got an oil president, an oil vice president, and a secretary of state who has an oil tanker named after her. So if you need to ask further than that why we don't have alcohol, I don't know. But, we used to run on alcohol in this country. The Model A and Model T were both designed to run on alcohol and ran on gasoline also as an afterthought. So, in that era, if you lived in the city, well, you could get gasoline because it was a waste byproduct of oil, just like gasoline is today. But if you drove out of the city, there were no gas stations. You stopped by a farm, you tanked up on alcohol, and you were able to switch from one to the other from right inside the cab of your car. You turned a knob on the dash, which changed the air-fuel mixture, and then you tuned the car differently by changing when the spark fired, and you did that digitally. You did that with the digits of your left hand. In other words, you turned a lever, and you were able to go from alcohol to gasoline. Now, up until the early 1900s, alcohol and gasoline ran neck and neck in terms of who was the dominant fuel, and Rockefeller decided he wasn't going to play fair anymore. So he went and funded the Women's Christian Temperance Movement to the tune of $4 million, and they got prohibition passed, which, by the way, was not to stop the drinking of alcohol. It was to stop the manufacture of alcohol for any purpose. And that took alcohol off the market for quite a long time and made gasoline the national fuel.
Think about how few people in this country even know that, and that was I've heard about that before, but I'm glad you said it because now it makes sense. Here's the question. I mean, all these issues. We know that gas prices are astronomical. Granted, oil just hit a little bit of a low, not a low today, but it dropped $5.50. Big deal, biggest drop since '93. Even still, with that, a lot of experts are predicting $200 barrels in oil, and we know that gas is going to go above. I think the national average just hit $4.11. Regardless, the point being, gas is at a ridiculously high price, and I think the question here, David, is what can we do as a population? But let's start even smaller than that. What can I do? I don't know anything about engines. I don't know anything about alcohol other than I like to drink it. So what can I do? I mean, obviously struggling with the high gas prices. Can you make recommendations of altering your engines or other things that we can do to help ease the burden of high gas prices?
Well, I'll be happy to explain that, but the first thing you got to do is stop whining about high gas prices. The United States isn't paying anything like the full price of gas. I talked to farmers in Australia, earlier this week. They're paying $9 a gallon. I talked with colleagues in the ag department in Ghana. They're paying $14 a gallon. And in South Africa, they're paying $12. So we're actually paying that here, too. $5.60 a gallon is the subsidy that we pay from our taxes to the oil companies on every gallon. So we're really paying more like $9 or $10 ourselves here. They just hide it in the income tax. Now, what can we do about it? Basically, making alcohol is mankind's second oldest profession. This is not some high-tech process that is all patented you can't do yourself. You start off with a material that has starch or sugar in it. You go ahead and ferment it using yeast, the same yeast that make wine or beer. And then once the yeast are dead drunk and they keel over, usually at around 13% alcohol, we then have to put that in a distillery, which we then boil the alcohol off. And with a good modern low-tech still, we can get 192 proof on the first pass, which is plenty strong enough to run your car. In fact, in Brazil, that's all they use. They don't get the last 4% of water out. That's what the last 8 proof is water. And they've been doing that for 20 years. Not only does it not hurt the cars, it actually helps them run a little better. So a tiny amount of water is actually a benefit. So, can you do this yourself? Absolutely. Building a still that would produce 100 gallons in a day, and you have to know how to weld to build a still, so you might have to join up with a buddy who knows if you don't know how. Building a still like that, which is a little bigger than this desk I'm sitting in front of here, would probably produce 100 gallons in a day, and you're talking about doing it for way under $1 a gallon. A still like that would cost you like $1,500 to build.
Yeah, sure, and I mean it all sounds great, and I like the idea, but for all intents and purposes, for someone who like myself maybe wants to drive to New Jersey once in a while and basically can't, even if I could afford it, the question is this really practical? Even if, let's say you have to modify your engine, do you have to actually modify your car's engine to accept this, or is it'll just run?